it was about jaw-dropping what we saw down there. And this is just a shot of a soybean field in Nebraska. And we were thinking, holy cow, these guys even spray weeds down here. But they sprayed and they spray and they spray. And there wasn't just one field that looked like this. They were scattered all over the place. So it's quite kind of a jaw dropper for us, and we came back and figured we had, 5-6 years before we would find it in North Dakota. Well, we found it in North Dakota the very next year, and so it's got our attention, and I think we all need to work as a team to keep this under wraps. This was a couple of years ago in Benson County. I was going down the road and I just looked over, and once you see fields like this in Nebraska, you just start to look for these weeds, and just hopefully you don't have them. But I got out of the vehicle, went across the ditch and the slough, and I found both Palmer Amaranth and water hemp in a couple of fields not very far apart. And fortunately, we were able to get these under control prior to a lot of this stuff going to seed. And it was just kind of a fluke. I happened to drive by it and see it, and I caught it. And we had quite an effort with some growers and stuff. We sent out a message, and we had about 25-30 guys come on over, and we rode one particular field. I remember it was a real fiasco, but it was about a 300-acre soybean field, and we filled bags and bags and bags, and came back again and filled more bags of these weeds, and we try to keep them from going to seed and spreading across. And of course, then it's been monitored ever since. But we do have them here, and we just need to know what they look like. A grower in Benson County sent me this picture. This was a few years ago. He wanted to know, is this Palmer or water hemp, or what do we have? Actually, it ended up being Powell Amaranth, which many of the dry bean growers know this weed very well. It's kind of it can have its challenges too, but he said, I just got a couple of weeds in the field, and I said, well, if it were mine, I would get out there and get those out of there before they go to seed, and just to keep them from blowing up. And that's kind of my theme here today. If you see a few and they're not overwhelming, get them out of there, and I'll show you some more pictures of things we've been finding. There's just another picture of a Powell Amaranth. This was found along the shelter belt. I don't know that a bird came and dropped a seed or something, but it was right away. I was like, holy shit, here we go. We got water hemp or Palmer Amaranth, and this one's kind of hard to distinguish. It'll trick a lot of people, even some of the sharp weed scientists. But you look for hairs, and specifically the hairs on this Powell are found up towards the growing point, up on top. And there again, with today's technology, with our phones and things, we can take some really good pictures. I wouldn't say this is a good picture. This is a horrible picture for identifying purposes, and yeah, I took it, but the idea was just to get a good look at just how prolific of a seed producer they can be. And it wasn't just a few, there was quite a few, and I contacted the grower and suggest maybe you want to try to eliminate some of these a little bit. One thing that I want to mention is, if you find these in your field, regardless of the species, it's probably a good idea to destroy them in that field rather than bouncing them down the road in the back of a pickup or on a trailer. And I'll show you a picture of something like that. And hindsight is pretty sharp. We should have done something a little different. A couple of years ago, and this was in Benson County, we found a whole bunch of these pigweeds coming up with these watermarks on them. And we'd read, and some of the weed scientists, that sometimes Palmer Amaranth has watermarks. Well, I would have bet $1,000 this cornfield that we were in was loaded with Palmer Amaranth due to those watermarks. We kind of just jumped to a conclusion. Every time a county is initially found Palmer in it, you send a sample off for a DNA confirmation as to what it was. We were fooled. The field was sprayed. Not that the guy wanted a whole bunch of Powell Amaranth, but that's what the DNA analysis came back and said it was. And this was just a larger plant I ran across this summer. So there's some genetic diversity in some of our pigweed species, and they don't always look alike. Even though nobody had ever heard of watermarks on Powell before. Now there's a couple of instances where it's been found locally here. This is just a pigweed. This is a Palmer amaranth. Notice the leaf shape is kind of ovate. The cotyledons are more like an egg shape versus linear. But you know, most of us aren't going to be able to tell, oh, there's redwood pigweed, there's this and that when they're small like this. Possibly with the redwood with all the hairs on it, that's kind of a dead giveaway, but some of these other ones are very hard to distinguish. The important thing is, this is the time to get after them when they're I think the Liberty label is 2 inches or smaller. Some of the other products, you want to get them before they're 4 inches, and I'll show you some data of why it doesn't work when they get a little bit bigger. And this is just a seedling of a water hemp. We can just see the different leaf shape. It's kind of long or linear, it's called, and sometimes this will have a little bit of a sheen. There again, knowing what these are when they're small is great if you can identify them, but the biggest thing is, there again, it's control time when they're small like this. Otherwise, we have some real challenges. This is a slide from some pictures taken in 2017 when we went to Nebraska. An identifying characteristic of Palmer amaranth is that long leaf stem called the petiole, and you can also see the watermarks on there too, and you can just see what a competitive monster they can be in a soybean field or cornfield or what have you. One of the gals on the trip grabbed a hold of the stump like this, and it was near the size of a pop can, and so it's just like, holy smokes, those are like Jack and the Beanstalks going on here. And it was quite common to see some of those that big, and it was, there again, quite an eye-opener for us. One other characteristic on the female Palmer amaranth is they'll get spines on them at the leaf axials, and if you were to touch some of these here, you're gonna drop it. You're gonna let go real quick because it's gonna let you know. But it's only the female Palmer amaranth that has those spines, and also the seed head on the females only is quite prickly and not very comfortable to the touch. Why am I giving you these characteristics of what these things look like? I'll tell you why. I get more calls with different weeds being sent in from folks all over the place. We got a long way to go before we all know what this looks like, and it's important we know what it looks like. And NDSU's got a lot of information. There's publications up here, but do all yourself a favor and start asking questions when you see this in your field if you haven't noticed them before, and brush up a little bit about what this stuff looks like. It's just too important to not know it's there if you can all help it. This one here, this was in a soybean field 2 years ago, and this field was going to be combined within the next 2 days, and I was driving down Highway 2, and you can see the railroad tracks here. It was along the rail. There seems to be a commonality, at least in some locations, of weed seeds blowing up along the rail. I found this. I alerted the grower. Well, there's 3 growers on this operation. We went out there, and this whole line along the edge of this soybean field was just loaded with thousands and thousands of these water hemp plants. And you know, where do you start? So we started pulling and this and that, and tried to pile them up, and we had our work cut out for us. And the only good thing I can say about it was caught before the combine ran through there and went and spread it across the rest of the farm. Because I have pretty good feeling, you know, they maybe wanted to run the combine through this edge, but there was other scattered plants within that field where there was seeds, and they were viable, and they would have been easily spread. This is the following year in the same field. There was wheat growing, and the herbicide program they used to sharpen as a tree early on, and in the field, in a wheat field, they used Husky Complete. And you know, it was dry last year, so we didn't have a ton of germination, but normally every time you get a shot of rain, this stuff continues to germinate throughout the growing season, well into August and September. So there was some that germed later on, and they came back with a dicamba and a 2,4-D for a burn down. And I went out there and I walked the field numerous times, and I commended the boys on the job they did. There wasn't hardly any weeds out there, and I was certain it was just going to be loaded with the sheer amount of seed that went there. I have a pretty strong feeling it's loaded with seed in there, and it's going to take some work down the road to use up that seed bank and get it back to where we might have to worry quite as much. But there again, the pre-emergents are definitely very important, and then some products with some extended residual activity to give you another 28, 30 some days of control. This is a picture of water hemp, both a male and a female. Many times the males are going to be kind of fluffy, and you can actually see the pollen if you touch them when they're shedding their pollen. It's kind of annoying, but that's the one on the left there is kind of a tannish red, and almost all the water hemp female plants I do see have that characteristic color. And the thing that this weed has going for it, there's both male and female plants. They cross-pollinate, so you have genetic diversity being moved back and forth very easily. Unlike the redwood pigweed, which self-pollinates, and it's going to use its own pollen to create seeds, so it's not transferring as much pollen or genetic material every year it makes seed. Unlike both Palmer and water hemp. And the other one I talked about was Powell amaranth. That one is self-pollinated too, so you don't have male and female plants. So this is what the water hemps look like, both male and female. Here's some seed heads of Palmer. The top one is female, and that one I mentioned, you touch it, it'll make you'll know it, because it'll poke you a little bit. And then the male, which sheds the pollen, is just as soft as a kitty's tail. And those plants have a little different look to them too. A few years ago there was a contaminated millet seed. It became a commonality. I don't know how it got in there, but NESU weed scientists were noticing it and getting calls on it, and suggested anybody who's growing millet for cattle feed to get out there and walk your fields. This particular weed here on the left, you could probably see that from the pickup, but how about this one right here? There's a seed head there, very difficult to see. So getting boots on the ground and out into the fields, sometimes if you've got this started on your farm, is a very good idea. You're not going to see all of it from the road. And a lot of times it'll do just fine down in the canopy too, whether it be corn or soybeans or wheat. This is some water hemp, and by the looks of it, this is a bunch of males, pollen shedders. This was 3 years ago, again in Benson County. There was a sunflower field that was seeded, and this low spot, it was too wet to seed, there was water standing there. I feel migratory birds brought this in, and it blew up in this one slough, and only in this one slough, and the grower has been monitoring, and he hasn't found it spread all over. But we went out there to pick some of these weeds, and they looked just like the ones down in Nebraska. They were on steroids, the stumps of these things, and we used pruners to cut the limbs off. But when you would grab one of those and just snap it off, it was just turgid and like full of water, and maybe that's why they call it water hemp, but it was something else. We were going to put the weeds in a chemical shuttle. We stuck 3 weeds in there, and the thing was about full, so we loaded up the trailer. And I referred to this earlier, we probably should destroy these weeds and do something with them in this field rather than dragging them down the parade trail to wherever you're going to dispose of them. Because we would have been a perfect disseminator of seed had them been ripe. But I think what happened here, these seeds were not ripe yet. And we didn't find viable seed in there, but it only takes 14 days from pollination before you get viable seed in some of these pigweed species. So there's not a big window after they start to flower. When we were roguing a field of water hemp, and before we left the field, the growers, I said, let's maybe check our tennis shoes or our boot soles and make sure we don't have any seeds in the cracks of our soles of our shoes. And I took mine off. I go, well, holy cow, look at this. I got a bunch of seeds right in my shoe. Those little black seeds right there. So you can easily spread it. Yeah, anything that comes in and out of a field, whether it be I'll even say a cow or a four-wheeler or a tractor or pickup, anything, you stand the chance of moving seed from that field to another. So be very conscientious of that. And that year we went to Nebraska, we were coming back, and I was sitting next to Walsh County agent Brad Drummond, and we had a drought up in North Dakota and Montana, and all we could see when we were heading down there was these semis of loaded with hay bales. And we were like, oh my God, look, what do we got going on here? We got a very good dissemination tool, and whenever you bring in livestock feed from another area, be sure to monitor that site where it's being fed, and it can definitely bring this stuff onto your farm. Here we see it, it's a survivor. It'll grow in a crack in the street or up on that chimney of that house. A bird probably did its business, dropped down in the eave trough, and lo and behold, there's a water hemp, or I don't remember if it's a water hemp. It's a pigweed species anyway, growing in the rain gutter. And of course, grow on the back of a combine or in a truck box, any machinery. This was the soybean field I referred to that we rogued and rogued and rogued. This was 2 years ago, and what I want to share is everywhere where there was water, we found these weeds, both Palmer and water hemp, mainly water hemp, but there was some Palmer mixed in there too. And this is the soybean field we were roguing, and you can just see the spread of these pigweed seeds in this low area, from this slough over to this one. So that the key message here is watch your drainages, and wherever water moves, these seeds, they float like corks, and there again, I think they can blow across the prairie on a frozen tundra very easily too, but waterways seem to be a real good spot for them to transfer and move, whether it be a river or an annual stream or what have you. Here we want to know when these weeds emerge. You know, many of our weeds like kochia, they germinate in the spring. They're early germinators. But Palmer Amaranth, they'll keep germinating all the way out into September of the year if they get a flush of rain. This was a picture in Nebraska. This cornfield was a fairly high population, 30,000+ plants per acre, and these are bigweed seeds germinating on the surface. And the agronomist down there sent some pictures to me. There was plants that were 2 and 3 inches tall with a 1-inch seed head, and they were able to go to seed under the canopy. They didn't need direct light, and so that's the problematic thing. And canopy closure is important, absolutely. The quicker you get that canopy filled in, your competitiveness, well, it's not going to do the weeds any good, but they can survive down in there. So we just can't look for stuff blowing up through and over the top of the canopies. How long do these seeds last? We got both Palmer and water hemp here. After 36 months, there was still 5% of that seed that was viable. And if you put it in a freezer, imagine just, you know, tilled down in and in the soil, there was still 90-some% germination 4 years later. I've read 6-7 years is fairly common, and I've read even longer than that these seeds can be viable. Down in some of the southern states, they don't have any chemical control, or very little left that works. So they went to some hand weeding in the soybean field. The first year they did it, they spent 110 hours in there pulling weeds. The next year, 5 hours. The next year after that, 2 hours to get a handle on that seed bank. But the problem is, where do we get all this labor to come and do it? Hell, you can't even get somebody at Walmart at the checkout thing. You got to use a machine because nobody wants to come to work half the time. But even if everybody did want to go to work, we have enough manpower to do this. And this would be doggone expensive too. But it did help. Spray coverage, we always talk about it. The first thing wrong with this weed was sprayed when it was, you know, over a foot too high. It should have been sprayed under 4 inches. It looks like it was smoked pretty good with a contact herbicide, fried all the leaves. This was down in Nebraska that first year there. I looked a little bit closer, and you can see it, the leaf back shows, there was new growth being initiated out of there. And I've seen that, you know, believe me, with the kind of seed we saw down there, it would just come out of the ground, or if you ran over it with a tractor, it would have like arms coming up with seed heads on it. It was just unbelievable how prolific these can be. So there again, coverage is very important, and then follow up after it's been sprayed to make sure it did the job you wanted to. Here's some glufosinate or Liberty, a study that was done with some resistance. The yellow bar here is a full rate, and a half rate, you have triple as many survivors as you did with the full rate. So we don't want to skimp on rates. We don't have as much resistance here yet, and I'll share some of that in our state, but there's places they hardly have anything left that works. Here's just a prime example of, resistance. This weed was just smoked, killed, deader than a doornail, and this one survived. And there's another shot of it. In all likelihood, this may come out of it, possibly could make seed by the end of the growing season. Now here's dicamba, our savior in some of our soybean fields. We've got kochia out there that without this tool or this product, we can't probably even grow soybeans. And we've all seen some of these fields that are just taken over where something didn't go right. But there's resistance with dicamba too. And there again, the same as the last slide. Oops. The last slide, the black is a half rate, and this is a full rate. So they're not just getting it with one product, they're throwing the kitchen sink at it. Here's just some regrowth on that. Down in Kansas, Nebraska, they told us a lot of times you'll go through a weedy part of the field, your combine will spread these seeds up and down the field. I was going home from work one day, and I saw this soybean field along Devil's Lake, and I go, oh God, here we go. I went out there, and fortunately I didn't find Palmer or water hemp. I found Powell amaranth and red root pigweed, and I can't say for certain if this was seed that was spread by a combine, but it also could have been a skip with the weed sprayer, the chemical applicator. Something didn't work because it was uniform strips up and down that field. And our field borders and stuff, I think we need to do a little better job, because this is a seed making heaven right here. One thing I was told in Nebraska, with the glyphosate, you hang that boom out over the ditch and you kill the turf. That turf is very important in being competitive with weed seeds that might get there and start. So try to save that sod on the field edges, because that'll act as a bit of a barrier and give you a chance to be competitive against some of these other species. But there again, you probably need a broadleaf or something in there to take some of these down, but the sod can be your friend in some of those places. As far as the competitiveness, this will about blow you away. Corn yields 20% reduction in yields by just one plant in 6.5 feet. And this was common in Nebraska when we were down this stuff blew right up through the canopy of the corn, and it outgrew it. And then there was pictures earlier I saw with those seedlings right down on the deck. There again, they don't need full sunlight. And here's just one in the soybean field. We can see this is a palmer. Just how many seeds they can produce. One plant can have up to 500,000, I'm told. Just some more pigweeds. This is good old Benson County. We got, you can see that red tinge on these female water hemps. So when you see that, that's a pretty good indicator that you have it. But with today's cameras and stuff, like I said, don't be afraid to share some of this stuff with your agronomist or your county agent or somebody in the weed science team at NDSU. Help identify them. That's your first step in getting a control plan. This is a distribution of water hemp in the state. Nearly half of our state has it at this point. And by the way, water hemp isn't a whole lot better than Palmer. They're both just plain nasty. And here is the Palmer spread so far. And I think we have 14 counties now that have Palmer in it in our state so far. And there were some commonalities with these fields. Sunflower screens were found to be a disseminator of Palmer seed. Millet seed, 4 different counties, and I mentioned that earlier. Equipment, 4 counties in the state, and I think there's probably one more. I think Benson County had some spread by machinery. And then the rail, I'm certain these weed seeds move up and down the rail. I've seen it with my own eyes, 3 years, 4 years running, and you'd think those weed seeds would blow up by the time they got to a field near you, but those seeds are still up on those rail cars and in nooks and crannies hundreds of miles from where they left. You'd think it would blow off, but in all cases it does not. And then a lot of times there's those hopper bottoms in those rail cars will have all this, you know, extra seed there. Well, before the guy fills it up to send it on down the line, he's got to take that seed out of the bottom of those hoppers, and many times that's contaminated. So you gotta watch some of that stuff that comes in inadvertently. This is called, I think it's called fasciitis, kind of something like I got going on in my feet. But it's a genetic mutation that happens in bigweeds and dandelions. I've seen this also in kochia, but it's kind of weird. It's just the seed head will kind of fan out and flare out a little bit. I thought it was got a whip of herbicide and it didn't kill it, but there's an actual term for it. Joe Whiteley, our weed scientist, shared with me. A couple of years ago, we sent some seed in from Benson County to see what works and what didn't. This was with Waterhemp. 2,4-D and Flexstar killed all of it. Husky worked well, but it didn't get them all. Dicamba and glufosinate, more survived than died at a 3-inch application. That was quite surprising to me. There again, smaller plants, you're going to have a lot better control. Palmer Amaranth, these were seeds that I got a couple of years ago. Banville or Dicamba killed them all. Flexstar, we had about 75% of them were killed. There was still 25% that didn't get. This doesn't seem to be anything odd, but we're trying to kill plants at 2.5 feet, and Husky didn't get them. Well, that's really not no surprise, but it did work very well on the smaller plants. The cost of control, that's what I labeled this. I got this down the bottom. I just asked Joe Whiteley, our weed science specialist down at NDSU, you know, what does this mean? He said we're going to have double to 3.5 times the weed control cost to aggressively go after fields with Palmer and Waterhemp in the future. In southern states, Palmer Amaranth has resistance, get this, to every mode of action that's used in both soybean and corn. That's a scary thought. One thing we got going for us, we have a lot of other rotational crops we can use. We can have more modes of action with our small grains. They're down there, they're corn, soybean almost every year. We got a lot of different rotational crops and more herbicide choices as well, and short season crops that give us a benefit. Let me see. In North Dakota, the Palmer Amaranth, we have confirmed cases of resistance to 5 different modes of action, group 2, 4, 5, 9, and 27, and water hemp resistance to group 2s and glyphosate. So when in doubt, ask some questions and try to get a plan, and SU has a wonderful weed science program and can help get a plan put together, and if you work with your agronomists and stuff, those guys have as much knowledge as anybody with where this stuff is at out in the Lake Region area. They're looking at these fields all the time. But if you're looking for a herbicide plan or a rotational plan, and don't be afraid to contact your county agent. They'll help you get something put together. There again, I mentioned those publications. I'd like to see all these gone. We've got 150 of them here, and if you ever need more information on it, you Google it, NDSU site, you just Google Palmer Amaranth, and you'll get a lot of real quality reading. That's the end of my time.